For those who have been listening or now watching our podcast for any length of time, you know just a little bit about my history. I've served in the ministry in one form or another over 4 decades, pastoring large churches, medium, and small churches. I've also served bivocationally, meaning that I've served in the marketplace at the same time that I was pastoring a church, which I really don't recommend if you can avoid. I talk about that in one of my podcasts, but that's another story. In any case, during the time that I was serving bivocationally, I was in the field of sales, and specifically I was involved with insurance, investments, and as a registered investment advisor also in stocks and that sort of thing. And there was a motivational speaker during those times, back then, and actually became world famous, whose name was Zig Ziglar. And I'm sure that any of you who have been around for a number of years know that name. Zig Ziglar would fill conference halls, stadiums. People would come to see him from all over just to hear him speak and give motivational talks. And what was unique about Zig Ziglar is that he would speak to an audience and you knew that he was a Christian. How? Well, he often would pepper many of his discussions with scripture, or he'd talk about biblical principles. He would exalt the principles of marriage. He referred to his wife as the redhead. And he'd tell these little anecdotal stories that were designed to help motivate and help release people from doing the wrong thing and send them in the right direction. He truly was a great Christian leader in the marketplace. Now, I'm bringing all this to your attention because today we have a very special guest. His name is Krish Dhanam. And Krish began working for the Ziglar organization many years ago, originally as a telemarketer, and then became his assistant. Zig's assistant, traveling all over the world, and then also assisting him and then speaking in many of those conferences. They addressed companies like Hitachi, the United States Army, and many others in large crowds, sharing their influence and telling people about Christ in the process. So today I have the privilege of sharing with you my interview with Krish Dhanam, right after the break. Back in a moment.
Welcome to Minister's Toolbox, providing leaders with the tools they need to succeed in ministry. Now, here's your host, Casey Sabella.
Krish, just want to welcome you to the show this morning.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate you bringing me on and allowing me to be part of your extended influence.
I just wanted to begin by asking you your origin story, how you came to faith and perhaps where Zig Ziglar came into play.
Well, I was raised in southern India, born into another worldview, predominantly Hinduism. I come from a high priest background, which is the Brahmin, which is the highest caste. Along the way, went to business school up north, met and fell in love with a girl who was a generational Christian. Her great-grandparents had been converted by Methodist missionaries who had come to India at the turn of the late 1800s. So her father was adamantly opposed to the union. Her mother somehow believed that I could be a voice for it. So against popular opinion within the prevailing class in India, she says, I'm going to allow my daughter to marry this boy, and I'm going to pray for him for 7 years if I need to. And that's about how long it took. But her prayer was very specific, that I would meet and be influenced by people who would challenge my thoughts, that I would eventually give up my corporate identity and come back to India as an evangel. Both came true. I ended up meeting a man named Zig Ziglar, who I went to work for as a telemarketer. And my mother-in-law's prophecy, or my mother-in-law's words of wisdom, did pan out because Mr. Ziglar began to influence and mold me.
Now, when we're talking about Zig Ziglar, obviously his organization was very large. Mm-hmm. So obviously you connected with him, but how was it that he just connected with you specifically? Because I imagine he has a lot of employees, or had a lot of employees.
Yeah, I had a business degree, so I did use my gifting in terms of educational acumen to force my way up to being next to him.
Okay.
I was a telemarketer, and I saw that there was a job of someone who traveled with him.
I see.
I wrote a proposal to the organization saying, hey, why don't I do both jobs for a period of time and don't pay me for one for a period of a year? They had nothing to lose, everything to gain. So they allowed me to travel with him. I tell people you don't need an MBA to carry Zig Ziglar's briefcase. but you need to be next to Zig Ziglar carrying his briefcase to get his wisdom. So I worked for him initially as a telemarketer. Like I said, within about 4 months, I became a traveling associate to him. And that journey continued 17 years. But I never forgot my primary role. I never self-aggrandized myself. I never considered myself as equal. Even though eventually I shared the stage with him, I always walked 2 steps behind him. Mm-hmm. I was his man Friday, his male nurse towards the end. And Casey, I have one statement which I make to people is that God gave me the privilege of taking Mr. Ziglar's shoes to be shined when no one knew who I was. He gave me the privilege of taking him to the bathroom when he had gotten Alzheimer's and forgot who he was. We truly had a divine journey together.
Wow. This morning, as it happens, I was just reading a book by Peter Daniels. You might be familiar with that name. And, some of the same characteristics he was sharing that you're bringing up that I just wanted to mention in passing is, you mentioned that you decided to go work for him and said, I'll work for you for nothing. That immediately identified you as a non-American. And it's unfortunate, but in our day and age, is that people want something before they receive something. And what you were doing, and I imagine what attracted Zig in the first place, is you're saying, listen, I value what you have to share so much that I am willing to spend whatever time at my own cost to get that knowledge. And that dynamic is so missing in our workplace today. We kind of say, how much are you going to pay me? How much am I going to make? This kind of thing. And it's always about what am I going to get instead of what we can contribute.
Yeah, very early on in my journey, Mr. Ziglar said something to me that sparked my interest in a different way. He said, if you allow me to teach you to play the long game, I'll make you a world changer.
Wow.
But if you're here for instant gratification in a short game, neither is my philosophy nor my friendship worth anything. You'll get something because the principles we teach will allow you to change your life and increase your standard of living. But if you want to enhance your quality of life, always play the long game. And he always ministered long-term voluntary change. And I think we are a society fixated on short-term, quick gratification.
And interestingly enough, that's really the same principles in the church too, isn't it? If people come into churches and their thing is, what are you going to do for me? Initially we do. We come to churches not for the church's benefit, but for our own. But if our long-term commitment is, what are you doing for me today? Is the sermon good enough for me? Have you fed me properly? Somewhere along the line, we don't become real disciples of Christ, do we?
No, and Casey, I know that your broader reach is to pastors through your minister's toolbox and the things you give them. But I heard one pastor, say, I prayed for 20 years, Lord, use me. And nothing happened. And everybody around me was succeeding and I wasn't. And he says, one day I changed the prayer, Lord, make me usable. Until we allow the carpenter to work on us or the potter to mold us, we do not become what God intends for his future glory. Ultimately, we're all working in what is called a finished work. How do I know that? I'm not a theologian, but he said it is finished. We are participants in a finished work. And I labor in the fact that God doesn't want me, doesn't need me. He created the universe. He wants me, which is gratifying. And so using us to fulfill his means we have to bend so low that we can't see the face of those who we are serving, but they look over us and see the Jesus who sent us. And I think that's lost because ultimately, wherever I go in the world now, if I find dissent, the first thing I do is a foot washing ceremony, and somehow it works.
Wow. It's as you're talking about these things, and again, it comes back to marketplace ministry, and I'm thinking about pastors. We talked about this offline, but so many pastors, because they've been in the ministry all of their lives, many of them who went to school, many of them never have even worked in the marketplace. And so oftentimes they have people that come to their churches that are working, but the mindset that has been communicated to them via Bible school and or training and or periodicals or whatever is sort of the purpose for people working in jobs is so that they can make money, so that they can support the church. And while that probably has obviously some bearing to it, that's really a very limited view of how God calls people. And I think that many times it's been my experience in speaking with pastors that they really don't have a good understanding of how to equip the men and women in their church to really be marketplace ministers. I wonder if you could speak to that for a moment.
Sure. And I mean, I get my training on this from the pastors globally, many of whom are bivocational because their churches cannot sustain them. So a lot of the pastors I interact with are actually marketplace people. So that's maybe a different angle. But I simply think that expecting your congregation to just be people who give to you because of their ability is myopic. They have a broader reach, and that leaves when they leave your premises. So make church a refueling stop, not a rest stop. Teach them that you're here to fill them up so that when they go into the world, your words carry into the world. And that's when you're a true shepherd to your flock. If you treat them as a place where they come as a haven, it becomes a rest stop. They come to you with their burdens and their problems, and they give a little of their tithe and their thing. But their greater contribution is in the marketplace, and that is apostolic. I mean, Jesus never went to the seminary to pick anybody. Most of the people he picked were in the marketplace. Mm. And I always tell people the best model of living is the model of Acts. You know, have a Paul to look up to, have a Barnabas to encourage you, and have a Timothy to give it to. And if we do that in replication, I think we'll succeed beyond our wildest dreams.
You know, I was listening to a speaker a number of years ago. He wrote a book called Futureville, and he happened to mention something while he was speaking. But in this particular case, and excuse me if I don't get all the details correct, but he had a woman in his church that had been a faithful Sunday school teacher for like 20 years. And so they gave her an award for perfect attendance and for being a Sunday school teacher. However, what they didn't give her an award for is something she accomplished in the city of Boston. She had been probably the primary mover in getting Boston Harbor cleaned up. In fact, she was the one who had done that and put together a team in the marketplace, and business people and politicians and everything else who'd done this Herculean work that had brought about incredible change. But when the church came to give her an award, it was for her Sunday school attendance. And when I heard that story, it just hits you, the contrast. Oftentimes, again, what a pastor will see is they see somebody in a pew and they see the value of what they're doing while they're in that Sunday service. One of the things that we perhaps talked about even again offline is this idea of perhaps meeting with your business people in their place of business and really kind of seeing where they're working and what they're doing and talk to them about those kind of things. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, in fact, I do this quite a bit, and I'm glad you brought that up, because anytime I'm asked to come and share a message on a Sunday in a church somewhere, I always ask the pastor, I said, I come from the marketplace and you're probably inviting me because you've either heard me or I come by reputation or affiliation. But one thing you don't know about me is I minister in the marketplace. So can you give me the congregants on the Saturday afternoon where we can engage with each other on strategic ideas, understanding other worldviews? How do you navigate through all the isms that are out there? How do you actually take the word of God that is being preached to them faithfully and manifestly on Sunday morning and apply it? I mean, I'm not asking you take your Bible and run around the halls of your building waving it. That's lunacy. But, as Adrian Rogers says, the only way the Jesus in you is going to find the Jesus in them is if you let them. So.
Now, you have programs that are through your ministry that people can do either online or how does that work?
We have a bunch of resources. I don't have an online. We're working on some of those components. I have a YouTube channel which people can track with me. We do a lot of stuff through podcasts. But my ministry websites and the other corporate websites we have a bunch of resources that we have put on there. On my ministry, which is Mala, M-A-L-A, malaministries.org. If they go to that, they'll see on the resource page great documentation from other theologians who are smarter than me, who invested in me and said they wanted me to be the tertiary purveyor of the work that they have already created. So I feel very gratified that they considered me a conduit of their wisdom. And I asked them, I said, if you give it to me, I'll make sure many people get it. And that's the goal. None of us can take what God has given us as intellect or the learning we have amassed with us. I'd rather leave it on this side. And for those of you who watch Casey and listen to his show, my copyright is I give it to you so you can copy it right.
But this is a great resource, and I'll have it obviously in our show notes and such. But for those pastors who really feel inadequate in terms of training people for the marketplace, here's a tool that you can use and partner with Krish in this whole process. I think that your men particularly, and your women obviously as well, but would be really charged if they get a sense that the church is affirming their ministry in the marketplace. I think that it's probably very discouraging after a while if someone is attending a church year after year after year, and what they do most of the week is sort of ignored. And then what is really valued is their volunteer work on a Sunday morning. And it's not taking away from what needs to be done. Obviously, the church itself needs certain dynamics, but we're really missing out on a lot of godly ministry because we're not recognizing it for what it is and feeding into that and supporting that.
Yeah, and when you understand worldviews and go through the apologetics training, your conversational style changes. Mm-hmm. You have to learn to meet people where they are. The two components we are given are the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. I've often said to people in my parachurch world that I work in, that if you just go and evangelize people and don't love them, you're irritating. If you just love them and don't tell them who sent you, you're just a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. We need both. And I think there is a strategic way, and you can do both. Emerson said, if you're going to pull me up, you better be on higher ground. But Joby Harris said, otherwise the day will come when by the sheer weight of our numbers, we will pull you down. I think we are accommodating people to meet societal need. And as a result of that, we are forgetting our primary edict. And I think we need to strengthen our people. And it doesn't always have to be from the pulpit. The pulpit is where the shepherd will speak from. But I think we can use our time wisely, and we can get people together and engage them in the marketplace. I really do believe, Casey, in my heart, that America's next great revival will come from the marketplace. And
I agree. And this has just been fantastic. I mean, the time has gone by really quickly, but just really fantastic resources here. And again, we'll just make sure that we reference all of these things at the end of the podcast and get you connected any way you can. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate what you do as well.
I really want to thank Krish for spending a few moments with us to share his insights in how to reach people in the marketplace. Access the resources we spoke of at malaministries.org and connect. This is a great way for you to use some free resources to minister to the business people in your community and let them know that what they do outside of the church really matters. Our job as pastors is to equip the saints to do the work of ministry. But the work of ministry is often going to be done outside the walls of our church. I hope you catch that encouragement today. Well, before I go, I always end each podcast with a quote, especially for you. And this one is from someone that you probably recognize, Spurgeon, who said, "Every Christian is either a missionary or an imposter." Great words from a great preacher. Thanks again for being part of this podcast, and we'll see you again next week. Until next time.
For more resources, go to ministerstoolbox.com. Thanks for listening.